Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets are really socking the ball, knocking those home runs over the wall. East side, west side, everybody's coming down to meet the Mets of New York town. Oh, the butcher and the baker and the people on the streets, where do they go? To meet the Mets! Oh, they're hollering and cheering and they're jumping in their seats, where do they go? To meet the Mets! All the fans are true to the orange and blue, so hurry up and come on down, 'cause we got ourselves a ball club, the Mets of New York town. Give 'em a yell, give 'em a hand, and let 'em know you're rooting in the stand. Come on and meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets are really socking the ball, knocking those home runs over the wall. East side, west side, everybody's coming down to meet the Mets of New York town, of New York town.
We are up and rolling, Mets and baseball fans. Thank you guys so much for chiming in for the latest live stream here on WardyNYM, breaking down all the latest news and rumors regarding the Amazons. And yes, I know we're in this lockout, and yes, it is really frustrating. That's a broken record by now, but we do have plenty to discuss, an action-packed live stream. So whether you're watching this live or on replay, thank you guys so much for being here. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. Help us get to 100 likes for the first short-term goal. We'll try to get it 200 to 300 by the end of the live stream, per usual. And yeah, we have a lot to break down today. As I mentioned already, there's been some updates regarding the MLB Lockout Status. A new update just came out over the past 15 minutes leading up to the live stream now, which is great. We'll be deep diving that as well. We'll also be getting into the new bench coach hire for the New York Mets, which is a familiar face to many, including myself. Taking a look at the signings that they did over the past couple days, that being the international prospect signings, and also taking a look at some rumblings, rumors regarding Luis Castillo for the Cincinnati Reds, and taking a look at plenty of other potential player options for the Mets, either via trade or for agency, that could make sense for this team once the lockout is lifted. And I will, of course, be accompanied by a good friend and the co-host of the Mets'd Up podcast, GiraffeNeckMarc. You guys all know him by now. He'll be coming in right around 7:30 p.m. Eastern time or so into the live stream, so make sure to jump to that if you'd like to, if you're watching this on replay, but we'll be getting into plenty before then. I just want to thank you all so much for first chiming in. I see Hector, I see Darnell, John, Merlinful, Harrison's, how's it going? I saw you in my Rangers live stream yesterday too. Eli, Michael, great member on the channel. Drew, Dave, great friend and subscriber on the channel. Insider, Darren, great member and friend on the channel. How's it going, Darren? The best Mets fan in the UK you'll ever meet. Michael, Milty, Sean, Kish, great member on the channel. Guardians of Chaos, how's it going? And Sandy, Michael, great members on the channel. Michael White with the $10 donut. I'll be getting into that in a second. Thank you so much. JR, how's it going? Ghostway, all you guys, thank you all so much. Matthew, Germ Johnson, how to get an autograph. We can discuss that in a second here. Again, thank you so much for the kind words. Joey, Felix, great member. Let's dive right in, folks. Like I said, before I do anything, though, I am going to address this donation that will go further. How's it going, everybody? To everyone first chiming in again, really appreciate the support. Michael White, thank you again for the $10 donation. Let's get some love in the chat from my boy Michael White over here, my man. If I was GM, where do you draw the line on prospects in a trade for Luis Castillo, who's untouchable? Well, Luis Castillo is someone that's going to be taking up a good portion of today's episode show, if you will, later in the live stream once Mark gets in here. But I will tell you this, for me personally, I draw the line with Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty. Those are the two prospects for the New York Mets that I believe you should absolutely make sure you do not part with. And I also believe those are the exact prospects that the Mets are certain that they are not going to part with for basically anyone. I think it's really hard to find an exception as to who they would part with to really want to give up a Brett Beatty, a Francisco Alvarez. Those are two top prospects in the league. Alvarez is one of the best in all the MLB right now. By no means am I willing to part with them because the Mets can make a deal happen. Realistically, with other assets, it would be a lot. There's no doubting that. And that's why I said we'll be getting into a lot on Castillo, because there's been some proposals leaked out there through SNY that I really am shaking my head about. I'm curious what Marc's stance is going to be regarding that we'll be getting into shortly. So, Michael, thank you again for the $10 donation. Really, really appreciate that. Everyone else that's first chiming in the live stream, guys, you know the drill by now. If you're watching this live on a replay, I will, of course, be taking plenty of your questions towards the end of the show, so make sure to hold your thoughts there. If you have donations that you send my way, of course, I'll be able to address them then prior to. But we got a lot to get into, and I first want to start off by saying, how's everybody doing? You know, if you're watching live, let me know in the chat right now. If you're watching replay, let me know in the comments below. How are you feeling about this annoying lockout? It just, every week I feel like I'm repeating the same thing again and again, in the sense that, yeah, we're still in a lockout, and yeah, there isn't progress. The only thing that we can say that is finally starting to get something positive, at least, is knowing that they have been talking. The MLB came in with the stance that, oh yes, we're going to throw a lockout your way, even though that there was no reason to actually have a lockout. They decided to do it being petty to really try to, you know, amplify to get the MLBPA to be better in negotiations. But they took literally a month plus to actually talk and get in the meeting room. That happened last week. The MLB gave a proposal on core economics that did not go well. Surprise, surprise. It literally got nowhere from the proposal that I saw. The MLB standing firm on not wanting to give players early access to free agency and plenty of other things, just things that I'm not in favor of whatsoever. And the MLBPA, it's just been reported tonight at the time of being live here, that this Monday, yes, this Monday, the MLBPA will get back in the meeting room in person with the MLB, the owners, of course, Rob Manfred, everyone involved, and will be proposing their counter proposal to try to get some progress here. Now, I don't know exactly if we're going to get any progress. This feels like that this is going to just be one of multiple counter proposals that we're going to see, unfortunately. And at this rate, who knows exactly when the season's going to start on time. Spring training is not far away at all, but at this rate, I don't see any role where we start spring training on time. Will we even have a spring training? There's all these question marks. And as frustrating as it is, and trust me, it is, I'm at least satisfied to know that the MLBPA is giving their counter proposal, and it will be this Monday. So we'll see what happens. I'm not expecting it to go well. If I'm being blunt here, I'm sorry. I'm normally an optimist with things. This is one of those things that I'd be lying through my teeth if I said that, oh yeah, there's definitely some great progress that's going to happen. I'd love to be proven wrong, but that's just kind of how I'm feeling. So to everyone else that's first chiming in the live stream right now, let me know what your thoughts are right now on the lockout, as unfortunate as it is. It's really frustrating. Trust me, I'm well aware, but I'm curious to know what everyone's thoughts are at the moment. David Ireland, great member on the channel. Thank you so much for the $10 donation. Let's go, Mets. What's up, Wardy? How's it going, my man? Thank you so much for the donation. Really appreciate that. Hype in the chat, guys, to my man, great member on the channel, David Ireland, for the $10 donation. Also, shout out to, I think it was Germ, that earlier in the live stream asked for my autograph. Germ, if you email me, if you find my email, I think I have my email in the description of this live stream. If I don't, I'll try to make it a public for you guys. Or if you reach out to me on Twitter, I could definitely send you something with my I'm not sure why you would want my autograph. I'm definitely taking the compliment, though. I really do appreciate that. I appreciate everyone's support, seriously. But David, thank you again. Really does mean a lot. Okay, here's a question from Matthew, because like I said, we have to get into the new bench coach hire that we'll be doing shortly, along with a plethora of other topics here. And shout out everybody in the chat. I see Carlos, sports updates, Dev, Matthew. And Matthew has a good comment here saying, couldn't the Mets just sign Osmus for bench coach since the A's did that? Weren't they trying to find someone younger, analytical like Osmus? Here's the thing. I was under the impression that Osmus very well could have been a potential fit for the bench coach role, but clearly the Mets weren't trying to go down that route. Clearly they had other people in mind first, because Osmus, yes, he is that blend of, old and new school, 100%. And I do think that he will bode well in Oakland as their bench coach, but clearly the Mets were not trying to go down that route, because I felt that if they would have prioritized him, then we would have heard something. It would have happened shortly after him not actually landing the managerial position with the Mets. So clearly the Mets had reasons as to why they were not going for Ausmus for the bench coach role. And Ausmus is going to be in a good role now with the Oakland A's. That's a position where he may find himself potentially being the next man up manager down the road whenever their current manager, who was just put in place, that was already in the organization, we'll see how long he lasts there. But yeah, that's kind of my take on Ausmus. Wouldn't have been against him for bench coach, but the Mets clearly had the reasons as to why they didn't go down that route. I think the lockout stinks. I want baseball. Mets will land Correa. We're getting that in the chat. I love that. You guys are cracking me up. First time I've seen AB in the chat in a hot minute. Yeah, shout out AB. Let's see. Big donation here from Penn Mets. Penn Mets, thank you so much for the $20 donation. Really does mean a lot. Again, hype in the chat, guys. Help us get to 100 likes. That's the first short-term goal per usual. Whoever becomes 100th like in the stream, let me know. If that is you, I'll give you a big shout-out per usual, guys. Penn Mets, thank you so much for the dono, my man. You're always beyond generous. You know how much I appreciate you. So that's a broken record by now. Whenever they resolve this, I hope it is a 10-year agreement, not just the usual 4 or 5. Having this happen every 4 years will just kill the sport. You're preaching the choir. I love this. Penn Mets, you've been throwing the best questions with these donations possible for literally at least the past month from every comment that I've been seeing you make. So shout out to you, my man. Hype in the chat for Penn Mets. You're absolutely right. It's frustrating when you have 4 or 5. And it's even more frustrating when you know damn well that this has been something building for years now, ever since the last CBA was agreed upon, that everyone was under the belief that this would happen 2021 with it expiring, that it wouldn't bode well for either side, that they're going to be so apart. The fact that they have been so stubborn at this point, even with what we just saw what happened with the pandemic, even what we've learned from years prior, going back to the 90s when we had previous lockouts, it doesn't bode well for the sport. It really hurts the sport for a sport in itself that just absolutely sucks at marketing. There's no denying it. Baseball can be a million times better at marketing their sport and marketing their individual players, and they're doing the exact opposite by having this lockout happen when there was no need to have it happen. They could have just continued with the offseason until, of course, they got into a new CBA agreement. There didn't need to be a lockout. That's just the pettiness from the MLB side, once again, to say, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to go on the MLB.com. We're going to take your photos down. We're going to take all the articles about the active players down. That'll show the players union, we mean business. Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to do, right? And normally, fans in previous years, a lot of fans are normally more so on the MLB side for a lot of things. But we've seen a big flip-flop, a complete 180, which just shows you how ridiculous this all is right now. It needs to end. I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. But I do agree. If they can reach an agreement, let's make something long-lasting. I don't think that's going to happen because especially one side is going to be a lot more upset than the other. They're not going to reach a decision more than likely that's really going to have everyone feeling satisfied, at least not past short term. So for that reason, I don't see it being 10 years. I would love it if it was, because that means that finally we can get some structure, some stability, something less to worry about, right, 4 to 5 years from now. Every 4 to 5 years for that matter. But unfortunately, I just don't think that's the world that we currently live in. I wish it wasn't the case, but that unfortunately is the case. But Penn Mets, again, thank you so much for the donation. Really, really appreciate that. But with that being said, I do want to see where we are at in the poll quick before we go any further. And we're just less than 30 likes away already from 100, guys. Continue to smash that like and subscribe button. Out of over 100 votes already here in the live stream, live as we're happening, only 20 minutes in, 70% of you guys say yes, the Mets should in fact trade for Luis Castillo. Of course, context is most important on that front. It's not the fact of should they or not. I think most fans can agree they should. It's whether, one, will they, and two, what kind of deal are we looking at here? And that's what I'll be breaking down in depth with Mark based on proposals that we've been seeing recently, sharing my personal stance on those proposals, his as well, and plenty more, and plenty of other player topics. I'm really excited to deep dive in today's discussion with him. But Kish, thank you so much for the $10 donation. Great member on the channel. Shout out to Kish. Really appreciate that too. The owners have had profits increase each year, pandemic aside, while player salary has actually gone down slightly. It's time for revenue sharing between the two sides. Yes, you're absolutely... What has happened over the past 5+ years and recent CBA agreements, they have all been favored for the owner's side. You're 100% right. I've been reading up. I've been learning a lot more about this of recent. There's been some great articles that have come out from Ken Rosenthal, of course, who no longer works for MLB Network because of things regarding his voice that he has shared against Rob Manfred. He's been putting up some great stuff on The Athletic. So, guys, if you do have a subscription, highly recommend you read what they've been coming out with lately. Same thing with Jeff Passan for ESPN. They have really been killing it with what have been the clear issues, what has been the build up to this point. But yes, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Kish. Yes, you hit it right on the nail, to a T, my friend. Yes, you're right. Lockouts are normal in sports, even though they shouldn't be normalized. So, yes, are they normal? Have they happened in all major sports that I've witnessed as a major sports fan? Yes. Is that okay? No, it's not. Lockouts are not okay, and it's not something that should be normalized because, yes, it will hurt your sport, and baseball especially is a sport that is going to hurt far more than some other mainstream sports in North America. It's a simple fact. Michael White, thank you so much for becoming a new member on the channel. Really, really appreciate that as well. Thank you so much for that. Hype in the chat for Michael White becoming a new member here in WardyNYM. How's it going, Joseph? Everyone else in the live stream first chiming in. Do I see significant portion of the season getting canceled? No, I don't see significant portion of the season getting canceled. But again, your guess is as good as mine as to exactly, are we going to be able to have full season or not? If we do miss the season, how much are we going to miss? It's just a huge question mark still. And question marks suck when the questions that you want answered are so important. And that, of course, is when is this lockout going to end? When is it going to get lifted, right? But now let's pivot, guys, with our 200 viewers in the live stream at the point. Thank you guys so much for helping us get to 100 likes. We're just around there, getting close to, if not already. But let's talk about the bench coach hire for the New York Mets for a little bit before we get Mark in here, because this bench coach hire was not what I expected. If you guys have been following along, and let me pump the brakes for a minute. I know normally a bench coach hire, hitting coach hire, a potato, hires for a coaching staff are normally not something that fans for any sport are chomping at the bit to discuss. But again, we're in this lockout. We need to talk about things. And it was really important, in my opinion. I'm losing my voice here. Pardon me. And it was really important for me, and I've been preaching this for literally, if you go back to my videos, literally since the Mets started the managerial search, you'll see I have been advocating for the Mets, if they're going to hire a bench coach, hire someone that's young, analytically driven, that could be that next man up once Buck Showalter's done. Because Buck Showalter is here for a fun time, not a long time. Let's be real. The guy's in his mid-60s already. He's not getting any younger. So it would make sense the Mets could kill two birds with one stone. And doing so, that way that whoever's behind him, a young, analytically driven mind, can help him out, especially with the numbers, because that's something that Buck is not going to go out of his way to do. Thankfully, the Mets just have a great supporting staff now where he's going to be able to get a lot more information than he was accustomed to during his time with the Orioles and, of course, the Diamondbacks, Rangers, Yankees, yada, yada, yada. Point being is that the Mets have given us Mets fans to be under the impression for the past couple weeks that the Mets were going to hire a bench coach that was young and analytically driven. When you look at the names that they were throwing out there, the guys from the Padres organization, guys from the Giants organization, guys from the Reds organization, all young, analytically driven minds that they weren't either, one, not allowed to talk to, or two, that were denied because they just didn't want to go anywhere. And it seems to me that the Mets, they really tried their best to land a young, analytics-driven mind for bench coach, but realized that they just didn't have exactly what they were looking for. And I think us Mets fans should know that by now. It's a normality with this team when it comes to trying to hire people, and not just the front office, but the coaching staff now. So because they quote-unquote struck out on some guys, even though it isn't their fault, especially if they're not allowed access, that's just nature of the game. That stuff happens. That pretty much, in my mind, led them to, of course, bring someone back who they have familiarity with. That, of course, being with a veteran coach and Glenn Sherlock. Many of you guys probably know Glenn Sherlock by now. In case you don't, Glenn Sherlock has been in the Mets coaching staff already. And yes, he doesn't define as that young, analytics driven. He's in his 60s. He's 61 to be exact. And he was in the Mets coaching staff as their third base coach from 2017 to 2018. And this hire just happened over the past couple days, over this past week. I just didn't want to do an individual video about it because I felt, let's just talk about it in the live stream. Makes more sense, right? But Sherlock is someone who has been in the Mets organization already and was most recently their first base coach back in 2019. And then he has been with the Pittsburgh Pirates since then. And he comes back to the Mets now and reunites with Buck Showalter because he was also a part of Buck Showalter's coaching staff during Buck's time as manager for the New York Yankees back literally 2 decades plus ago, and during his time with the Arizona Diamondbacks. And Sherlock was a part of that coaching staff when the Diamondbacks won the World Series the year after Buck Showalter left them as well. in which in 2001, that's when they won it all. And yeah, Sherlock was a part of that staff, so he understands what it takes to win, has been in the league for multiple decades now, and now reunites with the New York Mets. But what this hire tells me personally is that, one, I'm not bothered by this whatsoever. And was I surprised to see Glenn Sherlock come in as the new bench coach for the Mets? Yes, I absolutely was. But it really feels like that this is more of a placeholder hire. And I understand that a bench coach is not going to make or break you at all. And I also understand that if there's one person in the Mets coaching staff right now that seems like he could have that potential future manager label on him, it's not Glenn Sherlock, but it's rather the Mets hitting coach and Eric Chavez, because Eric Chavez is that nice blend of old school, new school, understands new school analytics, and really has been defined as potentially an up-and-comer, someone that could be a future manager in the league. And he was someone that I even threw out there as a possibility from reports that I saw to be a managerial candidate for the Mets up until their official list came out that didn't have Chavez on there. But Eric Chavez seems like that one that very well could be the next man up past Buck. But for right now, nothing wrong with Sherlock. He's that kind of placeholder. I don't expect him to be here long term. And it also wouldn't be all that surprising if, say, after this upcoming season, however it goes, that the Mets may find themselves looking for a bench coach again, someone that's young, analytically driven, but they do it in the beginning of next offseason, because the Mets were also really at their hands tied, where they were trying to talk to coaches from opposing clubs when we're getting close to the season, assuming it starts on time. Again, I don't think it's going to at this rate. But point being is teams were more reluctant to allow their coaches, whether it was a pitching coach or someone in their staff, to even be promoted coming to the Mets as bench coach, because they knew that they were already losing a coach that had little time. They have very little ample time to actually get something done to fill that coach should they lose them to the Mets. So given the timing of the Mets doing this search, that was a factor into why they weren't able to talk to plenty of people that would have made sense for the role, young, analytically driven. But I'm not against this move. I think that this is more on the shorter term look, which again, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I'm interested to see exactly how much input Glenn Sherlock is going to have. And again, a familiar face, not just with the Mets, but with Buck. So if you look at all the hires that the Mets have done to this point, you have that balance. You have the people, and yes, Joey Cora, who apparently was advocated from Terry Collins. So you have Terry Collins giving his input for one hire, essentially, along with Francisco Lindor apparently idolizing him as a kid because he's from the same town as Lindor in Puerto Rico. But then you also have the Eric Chavez hire, which was exactly Billy Epler's pick. Then you look at, of course, and the Wayne Kirby hire for first base. That was definitely Buck Showalter's pick. And now you have Glenn Sherlock, which is a perfect mix of having previous experience in the Mets organization and also having previous experience with Buck Showalter. So familiarity, I understand it. I no sweat off my back. I don't think that this is a bad move at all. Surprising from what we were initially expecting, but understandable, knowing that the Mets very well a year from now, should they wish, can go out and try to get a more young, analytically driven bench coach if that is something that they're so inclined to do. So not an issue whatsoever. So if anyone has any comments on the Mets coaching staff, by all means, share them with me in the live stream. I'd love to hear it right now, guys. And as always, thank you guys so much for checking out the live stream at this point. If you guys have been enjoying, please make sure to smash that like and subscribe button and help us get at 13K subs, guys. We're getting really close. We're only a couple hundred away now. So I know out of my viewers, there's over 50% of you guys are not subscribed when you're watching my daily content. What are you doing? Smash that button. If you're going to keep watching me, the least you could do is actually smash that button, right? So definitely join the community. We're the largest Mets community here on YouTube that isn't directly affiliated with the Mets or SNY, which is beyond humbling. It's because of you guys that you have made this all possible. But I'm going to see some comments, read in here, folks, and then we will go further here in the live stream. Again, shout out to Michael White again for becoming a new member on the channel. Really, really appreciate that. Also going to check out the poll here as well. Okay, folks, when we look at the poll, still 71% out of 200 votes now want Luis Castillo, saying the Mets are advocating they should trade for him. And I'm with you on that one. I really am with you on that one, guys. Luis Castillo that dropped the ball against the Yanks. Then I'll let you figure out if that's the Luis Castillo we're discussing. I'll let you figure that one out. Let's see, talking about Vientos. Yep, that goes in hand with Castillo that we'll be talking about shortly. And we have some very exciting prospects. I've already discussed Simone Juan in a separate video on the channel. So if you guys haven't seen that already, please make sure you do. Had a lot of fun doing that. And I was able to do that video for you guys right away when the Mets signed him this past Saturday. The Mets signed a bunch of young prospects. They were either from the DR, Venezuela, and there was one prospect I believe that they signed that was from Panama. But other than that, it was all Dominican and Venezuelan young players ranging in the ages of 16 to 18, which is very, very exciting. Mets are really building that farm, and they landed some very exciting pieces with Simon Juan at the top. I've been raving about the guy ever since I saw him connect to the Mets, and he was presumed to be signed by the Mets going back to a year ago from reports. So knowing that buildup, it takes a while sometimes. It gets leaked way beforehand, probably when it shouldn't be, but it does. Pre-official, official type terms that yes, I'm going to go to this team once the signing period for me begins, which for Simon Juan's case was the beginning of 2022. And yeah, a lot of moves that the Mets have made prospect-wise I'm excited about. I'm excited to get into a lot more in-depth prospect discussions here on the channel throughout the offseason as we get closer to the MLB season, whenever that's going to start, because I honestly don't know when it's going to start at this rate, but definitely something that I'm very excited to get into. But I will say, from what we have seen to this point, with what the Mets have done this offseason, and especially this coaching staff, I'm comfortable. I think what they have done has been very smart. They're bringing in a lot of different minds. And I would say that, yes, the Mets have been under more so of a old school philosophy. No, I shouldn't even say old school. Cut that. They're not old school. They might seem a little more old school with the coaching staff, but they're not when it comes to the information that they're getting from the front office. They're so advanced. And speaking of front offices, I'm so glad I remember this. A report just came out over the past day. Ben Zosmer, who is the new assistant GM for the New York Mets, that was just moved up from director, head of analytics, who the Mets pried away from the Dodgers once Steve Cohen became owner just over this past year. Zosmer, he's in his late 20s. He's a Harvard grad. He literally has made analytics for fun that he does in doing for the Oscar voting. That's something that he does on the side. He's been on TV talking about it. So if you see his Twitter, you won't even think that he is a executive, an assistant GM for the Mets, because he has nothing baseball affiliated there. But Zosmer, who's a brilliant mind, was sought after by a Mets rival this offseason, and the Mets said, no, you are not allowed to interview him. And that was the Philadelphia Phillies. So for a Mets team that went all offseason trying to talk to great young minds from opposing clubs for president baseball operations and or GM, and that were denied, even in promotional roles sometimes, the Mets did the exact same thing, with them actually being the ones desired for a change. Zosmer was being sought after by the Phillies to be assistant GM, and Sandy Alderson and everyone involved said, nope, we're not going to let that happen. And shortly after, they moved Ben Zosmer up to the assistant GM, which makes a lot of sense. So normally when people in front offices are denied promotions for opposing clubs, it's because that they're going to be moved up internally. We saw more recently Brandon Gomes, who's a great young mind, who was the assistant GM for the Dodgers that the Mets had plenty interest in early this offseason. That ended up not happening, and he is now the official GM for the Dodgers, because the Dodgers haven't had an official GM in a couple of years now. So very exciting for them, respectively. Gomes, another great young mind. But Zosmer really has that feeling that he, in my mind, could very well be a long-term GM fit for the Mets. He has great input array. He's been having a lot of say. And knowing that the Mets already denied a team is further proof that this is going to be a reoccurring act we're going to see in years going forward with this front office, folks. The Mets are building such a great front office with so many great young analytics minds that opposing clubs and even rival clubs, yeah, they want a taste of that. So trust me when I say next offseason and then the offseasons going forward, you're going to see more of this reoccurring, with people in the Mets front office being sought after and the Mets having to say no, meaning that they have to promote them, or at least just don't want them to go elsewhere, because the Mets are building something very smart right now. I'm very excited what Steve Cohen has been doing. I think that everything to the T so far has been great with this analytics department, how much it has grown. And Ben Zosmer is the head force as to why that the analytics department has been growing so much in such a short period of time. So very happy the Mets did not allow him to be interviewed by the Phillies, and even more happy that the Mets, of course, moved him up to assistant GM then. Let's see here. Any chance Beltran with the bench coach? No, Mets already have their bench coach. Beltran is something that maybe the Mets talk to a year from now. That's something that wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, no, I wouldn't expect Beltran in any role with the Mets at this point. That's kind of, on the back burner. That's done with, I would say. Michael White, and how's it going, Max? I'm doing great. How are you, buddy? Michael White, thank you so much for the $5 donation. I really appreciate that. Simone Juan, from videos I've seen, reminds me of a young Vladdy Guerrero. Nah, I don't see young Vladdy Guerrero at all. I get what you're saying. I could see maybe slightly in the swing. If I'm being perfectly honest with Simone Juan's swing, I definitely saw some. I saw a little bit. I could understand the Byron Buxton a little bit more so with the athleticism than the swing, but Juan's swing, I see, a little bit. There was one player in particular that actually crossed my mind with him, and I don't know why I'm blanking on it right now. But no less, Simone Juan, I don't see as much with Vladdy Guerrero. If you're talking about senior or if you're talking about junior, that should be explained. If you're talking about senior back when he was young, then I can understand that a little bit more. Definitely don't see it with Vladdy Guerrero Jr., however, but I appreciate the donation a lot. And again, thank you so much for being a great member on the channel, Michael. Really, really appreciate that donation plenty. And we'll be having GiraffeNeckMarc in the live stream shortly, folks, as we have a plethora of topics to deep dive with him. Let's see. I see someone asking a question here in the chat. I'm just trying to see if I can address it. And James, I'm doing great. Hope you're doing well too. Great support on the channel. You've been so kind. Always, James. Thank you so much for everything. Are the Mets that deep with the Mets are getting deeper with prospects? Yes, the prospect pool is growing tremendously in a very short period of time. What they're finally doing now under Cohen and what they're going to do with this big draft coming up this summer, yeah, the Mets prospect pool is going to be very deep by the time that this season has concluded. Assuming that they didn't part with top prospects, which they could. But again, we'll see how the offseason goes. Pat Metz, thank you so much again for the $10 donation. I really appreciate that. Pat Metz says, Carlson and Kuzman were my favorite Mets, giving away my age. Awesome. First time since Frank Cashin and Davey Johnson were the hiring of Valentine. I have that feeling the team is going the right direction. Gotcha. I have a feeling the Mets are in a great direction too. I feel very firmly about that. And yes, a shout out to Bobby V as well. As we know, Bobby V may very well find himself back in the Mets, not coaching staff, but in the organization that we discussed in a previous video. But Pep Mets, again, thank you so much for the $10 donation. Really appreciate that. Those are some awesome thoughts there. There we go. You hear me, Mark?
Yeah, what's good, man? What's up?
Okay, you want to scooch a little bit if you can, just because I have the little thing in the middle so people know the talking points.
Yep.
Awesome. How you doing, buddy?
Doing well. How you doing? Long time no see.
I know, right? Yeah, long time no see. Yeah, guys, you may see Mark on the channel in the near future. Hint, hint. I'm going to say that much. But yeah, I want to bring you on here because I know that you've talked about it in your pod too with some of these topics with James Shiano. Shout out to James. But there's, even though that we're still in this lockout, at least we have somewhat positive news. So I want to know what your take is first on, of course, the lockout looking like that we're going to have a new meeting this Monday, this being the counter proposal from the MLBPA. So what was your initial take seeing that? I'm not surprised. Whether or not we're going to get anywhere, I think is a very different discussion.
Yeah, I mean, they had to have a little bit of time before they sent a counter just so that they go through everything and figure out their points that they want. Any meeting to me is positive because we went 6 to 8 weeks without having one. So anytime that we can get these two together, and it seems like they are going to meet in person, which they didn't do the last time, I think it's a step forward. I don't expect the lockout to be over tomorrow. I don't expect to be over this month. But the more that these two sides get with each other, get to lay out their plans, come back, actually do like collective bargaining here, it's a good step forward for Major League Baseball. So I'm feeling optimistic for sure.
I'm feeling cautiously optimistic. I think that's the best way to describe us Mets fans. Usually I feel that same way here with the lockout. And, I feel like that this is, of course, going to be just one of multiple counter proposals. But before we get into the Mets stuff, I really just wanted to ask you a little bit further about, kind of your raw takes on what has happened to this point, because I was ranting about it earlier in the live stream. I feel like I've been ranting about it every week now, but knowing that the MLB comes in and does this lockout when it didn't need to happen. It's not like this is something that had to be mandatory, right? They made it that way as kind of, I would say the pettiness of trying to get the MLBPA on board and get the ball rolling. But for them to do that and still go over a month without even having one discussion, what is your initial reaction to something like that, knowing that they waited so long really defeating the purpose of this point of even having a lockout in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to, it's a pissing contest at the end of the day with the owners and the players. And I'm always on the players' side here. I want the players to get everything they're asking for because it's no fun to be on the owner's side. We watch the players, and the lockout, like you said, it didn't need to happen. It was unnecessary. That whole letter that Manfred wrote was just nonsense of we have to lock the players out in order to maintain the integrity of baseball. Like, that's just absolute nonsense. This is why I don't understand when people go against the players and say that they're being, selfish in that. The owners decide to lock out. The commissioner decided to lock out. The players, they could have been, bargaining and going back and forth this entire time. It's really been on the owners, entire shoulders here for this thing happening. So, it's stupid. I think at the end of the day that there was nothing going on for 6 weeks. They should have been talking, but there's nothing that the players can do. And as we get closer and closer to the season, I feel like the players get more and more power where the owners start to lose because the owners just are going to be hemorrhaging money if there's no baseball. Of course, the players are too, but really at the end of the day, like the majority of the league isn't the ones making like those $30 million contracts. So it's a little less on their wallet than it will be on an owner's.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think that this is something that unfortunately is going to drag on because at the end of the day, and from everything that I've seen, and everyone's absolutely right from the articles I've seen from Ken and Jeff Passan, they just further proof that it's only going to mean so much when it's really going to start to hit their pockets like anything else. This is a money game first and foremost before anything. So it's unfortunate. I really do hope that we can get some progression. I hope that's the case on Monday. I don't expect it. So it's like if anything happens, even the slightest, it'll be a pleasant surprise, but by no means my game, my hopes up to this point. But talking now about the Mets here a bit, I know that, of course, their coaching staff is all but wrapped up. They still have to add to the bullpen. They still have to add, assistant hitting coach potentially. What has your take been as a whole with the coaching staff that they've done at this point? Because, of course, Glenn Sherlock, familiar face. He's someone that, as I was saying in the live stream earlier, I think he might be a little bit more of a placeholder considering what the Mets, what they were trying to do and what they weren't able to do because people weren't accessible, especially the Giants pitching coach. He was like my favorite by far that was potentially there, but they weren't able to get an interview done. So what has been your overall take on building this coaching staff for Buck Showalter?
Yeah, you got to think that a lot of the best guys available for this job are going to be taken by another team right now. And like you just mentioned, Andrew Bailey was a guy that a lot of people wanted. Ryan Flaherty was another name too, the two guys that we got denied. And it's not so much like the classic, like, oh, the Mets got denied again. It's because we're so late in the year now. And even though we are in a lockout and the season could be delayed, these teams, if they lose these guys and give the Mets position or, an opportunity to interview them and hire them for a position with the Mets, they then now have to go out and look for a new coach and they now have to go fill another spot. It was really tough. I agree. I don't think Glenn Sherlock was by any means the favorite to get this job. He's not my favorite, but it is also the bench coach position. I mean, at the end of the day, how many bench coaches do you really know in Major League Baseball? He's one of Buck Showalter's buddies. They've been around with each other forever. I think he started with Buck back with the Yankees in like the 90s. So
yep.
They've been around each other forever. If it's going to allow the Mets to win more games and allow Buck to feel more comfortable and he feels like he's going to be able to do the best job possible, sure, I'm all for it. But at the end of the day, like I would have preferred a younger, more forward-thinking mind. But it's probably just hard to find those guys right now with, everything that's going on.
Yeah, it felt like this was just kind of the continued narrative that we saw all offseason with the Mets, when not just coaching staff, but of course front office. There were so many people they were trying to go after. Unfortunately, they weren't able to land. And thankfully, it doesn't look like anything's been a problem right now. I'm loving what Billy Big Bucks is doing, right? But coaching staff-wise, I'm fine with what they've done. Again, I don't think bench coach is going to make or break your success. The positives that I saw, of course, with the young, analytically driven guys, really that you could have that heir apparent to Buck, to really have someone that can be groomed by him and really share that intel, because naturally Buck isn't going to be looking up all the numbers himself. He's going to be getting it from the front office. But if you could have someone in that coaching staff already kind of sharing that 2 cents that maybe he wasn't aware of, I think it's important. So for the first year, at least, we're not going to see that as much as maybe we would have liked. But I do think it's something that maybe the Mets will circle back on, depending on how the season goes too, once next offseason comes. And again, I'm not worried about that anytime soon, though. I want this offseason to really start to pick up again, meaning the lockout lifts. But getting on now from coaching staff, I know that the Mets have made over 20 signings internationally for prospects. And I'm not sure if this is a record for the team in one offseason. I know that normally teams, they sign, a bunch of prospects, ages 16 to 18. And I know all the signings for the Mets were either from the DR, Venezuela, and then there was one signing from Panama, which was pretty interesting. But what was your take on these signings, especially the two big ones, that being in Simone Juan, and I don't know, is a Willie, I don't know how to say his last name.
It's Fanyas, so there's like technically like a tilde over the end. But yeah, I mean, there's not much to take out of anybody outside of Simone Juan and Willie Fanyas, just because there's not a lot of info. And I know Jacob Resnick posted a lot of videos of dudes, but it's kind of hard to figure out what they're really throwing without actually having any sort of background information, or even, you know, like a radar gun. We don't know how hard these guys' fastballs are throwing, but you can just look at mechanics and stuff. With Simone Juan, what I liked a lot about him is I like his build. I like what he can project into. The comparison was George Springer, Byron Buxton. Hopefully in the future.
So like
that's your guy. I know. I just made your day that we might have a Buxton in the making here. But it's always tough with international prospects too. I mean, you can go throughout the lists in the past, and some of the guys that you think are the top guys end up doing nothing, and some of the guys that signed for $200,000, $300,000 end up being the diamonds in the rough. So it's really kind of hit or miss here. But as you know, prospect stuff has been moving forward and projecting has been getting better. They have been hitting more. And a guy like Simone Juan, big dude, big shoulders. He's filled out his body, 5-tool player. He's someone I am legitimately excited about. Going to keep a close eye on him all season long, because I expect him to not just, play in, the DSL or whatever those leagues are. I expect him to probably get to St. Lucie at some point next year and maybe make an impact. He's super, super talented, super young. Excited to see what he can do. And then Willie Fanyas is a little older. I think he turns 18 on Sunday.
Yeah.
So he's a little bit
early birthday to Willie then.
Yes. Happy early birthday. A little bit older, and that's fine. That's not a really big deal. He's still 18. I think that's like, getting a kid out of the draft from high school. A little bit different build than Simone Juan, but still a very good all-around player. Doesn't really have that same ceiling hype of Simone Juan, but the swing, I mean, everyone's seen the bat flip that he did on Twitter for that home run that he hit. He crushed it. Seems like he has pretty good power. He's a switch hitter as well, which is really cool. So
yeah, that's what stood out most to me about him.
Yeah, that these guys are so young that it's really, really hard to get excited about them, especially when there's not a whole lot out there. I was really into the international prospects last year, and that class was absolutely loaded. I don't know as much about this year's, to be honest, but I don't get the same feeling of like these are guaranteed stars. But I like everything that the Mets were doing with these top two guys, and hopefully we find some dudes at the bottom that could be really good too.
Yeah, I mean, look, just because Simone Juan's the only quote-unquote top prospect that the Mets signed doesn't mean that these signings are bad. Like Francisco Alvarez, he was a little bit lower on the ranking too, and look at him now in such a short period of time. So it's really hard to kind of differentiate exactly what their ceilings are going to be when they're literally only like 16, 17. These are kids. Like, I'm young, but like it's weird now talking about people where I'm like, yeah, this is a legit kid, even though he looks like a man. But Simone Juan especially, I'm very excited for him. You hit the nail on the head with everything. Just the ability to be that 5-tool aspect, I think, is huge. And I'm curious to see where he's going to rank soon among Mets outfielders, because it seems like that he may have a higher ceiling than even someone like Alex Ramirez, who is deemed by many as the top outfield prospect for the Mets that isn't ready now, like a Cleo Lee or even a Nick Plummer lesser. And then when you look at Fanyas, not just a switch hitting like bound, but interesting how a year ago he was looking like he was going to be a lock for the Angels at right around $1 million. That ended up not happening. Again, I don't know what the Angels are doing there. They're normally making more wrong decisions than right. So, I'm not too concerned about it. But the Mets signed him on $1.5 million. They got Juan for $1.9 million. These are the biggest signings among them in the Mets history. The biggest one was Alvarez a couple years ago under the Wilpons era. I believe that was $2.7 million, which was actually crazy looking back, how big of a deal that was at the time. But yeah, these are big moves. I'm excited to see how they're going to continue to build this prospect pool. But when you land like 22 kids, I definitely don't think that hurts your chances at really building depth, which is exactly what this team needs right now. And kind of pivoting, talking about prospects as a whole, what has kind of been your take, knowing I know you've interacted, of course, with an Alvarez, with a Mauricio, like a Beatty. So not to really deep dive these prospects right now, but just asking your raw thoughts on really how their development has been and how excited you are for them for this upcoming season, looking like that next cream of the crop of prospects for the Mets.
Yeah, I'm super excited about those three. Just like everybody else is in Mets world. There are three top guys for a reason. They're very good. Francisco Alvarez, I mean, he has the chance to just be kind of our, this is like super cliche, but like our Mike Piazza, right? Our next big hitting catcher. Defensively, he's going to be fine. Just like Piazza was, he was fine. You're not seeing Yadier Molina behind the plate, but you're seeing a much better bat. And that's where his impact's going to be able to be made. And it feels like right now that he is not going to be able to struggle whenever he does become ready. he's not ready now, but give him a full year in AA, a little bit in AAA, and maybe 2023, Francisco Alvarez could be our, starting opening day catcher, which would be really cool. Brett Beatty, I am way more excited about than I ever thought I would be. Saw him at the Fall League. He's just a way better athlete than I expected. Every scouting report up until honestly, the last 3 or 4 months was talking about how he's a little slow. He's clunky. He's kind of a bigger dude, and went there. And I was like, he's got long legs. He runs way better than I expected. If he's not going to be our third baseman of the future, which, if we get a guy like Chris Bryant, that's a real possibility. He could play the corner outfield without a doubt. I have no doubt in my mind that he could play there. And he's also very, very good at third base. I think he's underrated right now defensively at third. And his bat's fantastic. Alvarez and Beatty just put up some of the best BP that people have been seeing this year. And then in terms of Ronnie, he's a little bit more raw, still needs a little more development. I think, in terms of readiness, he's definitely the third of the three. But he's such a big kid, and he has made so many strides forward, and he's still so young that I feel like the sky's the limit for him. Just get a little more patient at the plate, and he could really, really start making people excited. But, he's probably the guy we end up trading.
And that's a perfect pivot to, what we're going to be talking about now, because there's been some, rumblings going around, as I'm sure you've seen from S&Y. They propose, Luis Castillo, who, of course, I think all of us Mets fans would love. If we look at the poll in the live stream right now, and we're at right around 300 votes, close to a nice 70% say yes, the Mets should trade for Castillo. And I don't think it's the matter of if the Mets should trade for Castillo or not, but of course, what are they giving up? And what I saw from S&Y twice now, 2 times that I just don't see happen. Not the fact that I would like it to happen, but more so I just don't see it happening. Their first proposal a couple days ago, I'm forgetting exactly who wrote it, came out and said that would be Luis Castillo, and a perfect deal that makes sense for both sides is giving up Ronnie Mauricio and JT Ginn. Now, when I look at that, I think that's still too low. I don't see a world where the Reds even pick up the phone. And maybe that I'm putting Luis Castillo on the highest pedestal known to man. And I know that James can vouch for this too, because I've talked to him about what makes sense, trade-wise. But Castillo is the most valuable pitcher available, either in trade or free agency. There's no one on his level, and there's no one that has the ceiling right now, given the control of his contract. So when I look at that proposal, I think that there's no shot in hell, because you have to not just, of course, outbid opposing clubs that have deeper, better prospect pools than yours, but you have to do that along with potentially leveling the fact that the prospects that you want to give up, there's teams, again, that can have not just deeper, but better players that they're willing to cough up. I think about Jose Barrios all the time back at the trade deadline. I'm to give up those number 2 and number 4 prospects for Toronto, they're going to be just fine because they have the depth. Mets are not in a spot where they have depth depending on the position exactly. Ronnie makes sense to deal with, I agree, because he's blocked, unless you maybe want to make him your second baseman in the future, which I do see some potential there. But what's your take on that proposal as a whole? And then we'll be talking about another one that actually just came out an hour ago.
Yeah, I don't think Mauricio and Ginn gets it done. JT Ginn. They just, especially for JT, a guy who kind of had a little bit of an up and down season last year, and that's going to happen coming off Tommy John surgery. I'm sure the Reds are going to want something a little more oomph. Ronnie's definitely a guy, but they also have a lot of really good middle infielders who are on their way up. So I don't think that there's that much of a necessity, especially when they have Jose Barrero, who's probably going to just slot in at shortstop for 160 games for them next year and be pretty good. And then, like you said, there's just other teams that could get Luis Castillo and offer more, just straight up offer more. Like you mentioned, Jose Barrios, the Blue Jays could just throw. They have so many middle infield prospects that they could throw. They have so many pitching guys that they could throw right now. That's a team that I think just would have a better offer right off the bat. Think of some of the other teams that could use Luis Castillo. They typically are just going to have a better haul than the Mets. I would love to have Luis Castillo in, but I don't want to deplete the farm system right now to do it. And we have so many picks coming up in this next draft. I'm really interested to see what we could do. But yeah, you definitely have to give up more if we're going to go after Luis Castillo.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And before we get on to the second proposal that I just saw come out and kind of counter what I think would make sense, I'm curious to see what exactly type proposal that you might be able to come up with. I do see a donation here in the chat. Mets Nation, thank you so much, Elliot. It says, hi guys, what's your opinion on Kershaw? We're going to be talking about Kershaw very soon. I just did a video on Kershaw. Make sure to check it out if you haven't already. But Mark, what's your just initial gut reaction to Kershaw? Mets possibility, is it there or no? Let me hear it.
Yeah, 0% chance. I would sooner name my child Chalupa Batman, as James will say on the podcast, before Clayton Kershaw comes to the Mets. I want him on the Mets. I'll take him any day, but I just do not think that there's a shot in the world that he comes here. It just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense for him to just pick up and come to New York. He has the World Series. He's got it all. He doesn't need to hunt one. I don't see it.
I agree with the notion, especially on the fact of hunting. Like, we don't know what his priorities are right now. We're going to find out post-lockout. I do think that out of all the options for the Mets pitching-wise, he is definitely not a top one, not for the talent aspect, but just for the fact of his willingness. It really is different than even getting a Max Scherzer. And nothing's impossible. We know who we're dealing with Steve Cohen. If there's anyone that can really throw the bag to make something happen, it is him and himself. But it still is definitely, I would say, is, far more unlikely than likely at this point. Not impossible, but definitely something that I wouldn't necessarily have at 0%, but it's pretty low. I agree with that one. And I reaffirmed that in my video when discussing him on the pros and cons to potentially pursuing him. And let's see here. Joey Fish, thank you so much for the $5 donation. Appreciate that as well. I saw someone comment in the chat, ask GiraffeNeck when the next buy or sell is. Do you know when the next buy or sell is? That's a good question.
Yeah, it was actually going to be tonight, but my editor had a little bit of a emergency I had to take care of, so it's going to be tomorrow.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
Yeah.
hope everything's good on your front with your editor. But yeah, I'm looking forward to checking out that video once you get it out. Those are always fun. And now talking about the other proposal, I just saw literally as I was getting ready to do the live stream, SNY came out with a segment. I'm assuming it was from maybe yesterday, talking about a potential Castillo deal. And this was, of course, from Jim Duquette, who always makes a perfect proposal, right? If you can pick up on the sarcasm. Yeah. But Jim put out, he said that Jeff McNeil and Mark Vientos for Castillo. And that is, again, it just doesn't, people don't seem to understand how valuable Castillo is, especially, again, it's not like that this is, the Mets are the only option that the Reds have to potentially trade. The Reds, one, do not need to trade him. And they're going to trade him. You're going to look for the best possible offer. And McNeil, does he make sense for them? A little bit, especially with the control. The Reds are a team where they're always fluctuating. What are they going to do? They're going back into this kind of, they're going to try to compete, but they're, of course, never going to throw enough dough to be a constant team where it's like, wow, okay, they're going all in. So that's where McNeil's contract makes sense. And I do think he would thrive in a park like the Harris Park for the Reds. But outside of that, Vientos, I can see some understanding there. Another versatile guy that should be MLB ready starting this year at some point, if not right away. But there's still, that just isn't enough. I'm like, that starts a discussion for sure, but you cannot have essentially Jeff McNeil as like the core piece to get a deal done. He has to be one of the pieces. I can agree with that, but not like the main guy.
Yeah, I don't even know if Jeff McNeil to the Reds even makes sense because like they got Indy at second. They still have like Moustakas who they're holding on to. They've got like every position that he's at besides like corner outfield is kind of crowded.
Corner.
Yeah, that would be the one spot. But even then, like the Reds can kind of get creative. Like it's a corner outfielder and you would never trade Luis Castillo for Jeff McNeil to play out of position essentially. And then like Vientos, if you're looking for a prospect, you're looking for that prime position, right? You're looking for that position of value. And that's going to be center field, shortstop, catcher, up the middle. Mark Vientos is a first baseman DH, really. Like he played a little corner outfield last year in the minors. I don't really know how well he can play it. I haven't heard too much about it, but it doesn't seem like he's really anything but a corner guy. And at defensively, it's going to be super, super sketchy. That to me, Jim Duquette, that's not even close to the realm of Luis Castillo would warrant back. If that was what the Reds came to the Mets with and they didn't accept it right now, I don't care if there's a lockout, accept it. Write it in blood, whatever it is, you take that because that's highway robbery. But I mean, yeah, it starts with Ronnie Mauricio and JT Ginn, or at least another one of the pitching prospects. And then you start to fill in these other pieces. But I mean, that is one of the worst proposals I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, and I know it's pretty easy, especially for being a fan of a certain team, that naturally you want to try to lowball like an offer when you just trying to think of it together. And don't get me wrong, when we take a look at the Francisco Lindor and Carlos Carrasco blockbuster trade, that deal price-wise, I think was better for the Mets than what most Mets fans were expecting, right? Like out of the proposals that we were seeing where the Mets were giving up literally an arm and a leg in doing so, it wasn't remotely close. And yes, they still gave up those key assets, with Rosario and Jimenez and Wolf and one other prospect that I'm just blanking on at the moment.
Yeah, I think it was Isaiah Green. Yeah.
Isaiah Green. Yes, exactly. Like in a nutshell, the Mets are still in a spot where, yes, they can get deals done, but to come up with the right price is so difficult. I think, however, I'm going to be contradictory and say I do think I have the right price. I do think that this would make sense for the Reds. I don't know if this is something that is actually, I don't think it's going to happen, but theoretically speaking, Luis Castillo, and if you're going to add a reliever, because why not, Luis Sessa, because I think that he would be fine for the Mets. And the Mets would give up McNeil, and I'm talking McNeil solely based on the rumors that we've seen with him. That's what led me to this proposal. McNeil, David Pearson, Ronnie Mauricio, and Robert Dominguez, who is the number 10 prospect for the Mets. What's your take on that proposal? How realistic or unrealistic do you think that is out of the ones that we've heard at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's closer for sure. I by no means go no, because it doesn't sound out of the realm. I think it's probably getting Sessa is probably the thing that like is the most out of the reach here, just because they have control over him. He was pretty good, and I don't know for what reason they would really throw him in unless they were getting like another prospect that they felt like they wanted.
Then kick him out.
Yeah, we'll kick Sessa out. We'll kick Sessa out. I think it's more realistic. I think it's better. Let me tell you, it's way better than Jim Duquette's. That's for sure. It's at least in a realm of possibility. I still think that it's probably going to be more prospect heavy than it would be with McNeil. But again, there is a world where they do want McNeil. He's a good player. If you're a team, he's a good player, and the Reds like it. Yeah, he's going to bounce back. And like you said, in that park, he'll hit well. He hits well in Philly, and that's an even bigger bandbox in Cincy. So he's such a weird person to find a team for because he can offer a competitive team value. And if you're rebuilding, he doesn't really make sense. But who really is going to take him? Like that's the hard thing to find with McNeil. But I like that one definitely a lot more.
Is there one that you can come up in your head that you think would actually make some pretty realistic sense? Again, doing your best, because just because we think it's going to make sense, we'll watch we see a trade happen and it's not even remotely close on the spectrum of actually adding up. Yeah,
I mean, I think Mauricio, JT. I don't think any of the major league players really. Maybe you throw in, I don't know, JD, but I don't even really see that. That feels crazy because again, that's the same. It's a bigger problem than you would with McNeil. But I think Mauricio, JT, and then maybe a couple of the younger pitchers. Maybe you throw in, Joel Diaz, who I know has got a lot of hype right now. Maybe you throw one of him in. Maybe you throw Robert Dominguez. Maybe you throw a combination of a couple of guys that are a little bit lower, a little bit younger. Some of the dudes maybe we got in the international pool this last time that the Reds possibly had interest in. I think it's probably going to be more of a haul of two big guys and a bunch of things around them rather than like three big name dudes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's what made it so tough because when you look at the Mets and how they're trying to operate this offseason, they're not trying to part with their top prospects. No. Billy's made that very clear, and I don't blame him. That's how you build this team. Do it through free agency, and then you work around. Once your farm is to a point where you can handle parting ways with, say, a chunk of your prospects because you're just that deep, then it makes perfect sense. Like, I think when we're looking at realistic trades for the Mets, like bigger trades, like quote-unquote blockbusters, I think that they're far more feasible and realistic at the trade deadline, especially because at that point, the draft would have happened already, right?
Yeah. I saw this. Joel Sherman talked about this on MLB Network before the lockout, and I disagree with this guy almost all the time, but he said this. I was like, damn, makes so much sense. And it was the Mets offseason plan, and it was just about how there's no reason to go after guys that have picks attached to them, right? We don't want to lose any picks. We've got like 7 in the first 100 or whatever it is next year. They have so much possibilities to get this huge influx of top quality prospects into their organization that they should really use that as a chip to then maybe get really aggressive at the trade deadline and reassess then, as opposed to going all for it at the start of the year and giving up a guy like Ronnie Mauricio when maybe you can do a little bit more, at the deadline, have a little more flexibility, as well as teams are going to be a little more pressured to give guys up at the deadline too, especially if you have a guy on an expiring contract. As much as I love Luis Castillo, and I think he's probably the top guy that we all want, there's going to be other people that we can find on the market that won't cost you an arm and a leg and can probably be very effective for this team as well.
And I think that's exactly the route that the Mets will prioritize. Again, nothing's impossible. It's not the fact that it can't happen. But if we're just basing things on what the Mets have shown us to this point, unless they've done a complete 180 and they're like, you know what, we're going to just throw prospects everywhere. We're going to do something. We want to land Castillo. It really feels like free agency is a better route. So would you agree that when addressing this team and the rotation, free agent market makes more sense than the trade market?
Yeah, I want Carlos Rodon. I want him so badly. To me, if we're going to be spending all this money and we're going for it, go for it. Go get Carlos Rodon. I'm happy to take the risk on him just because when he was clicking last year for that good, 100 innings, he was pretty untouchable. He was one of the best pitchers in baseball. I like the risk on that. James talked about it in the video that we did the other day with you about, buying for the future and buying on upside. And Carlos Rodon 100% has that upside. So I like that a lot more than maybe trading the farm for a guy like Luis Castillo, who did struggle a little bit last year.
So what's your take then on potentially the guys from the Oakland A's? Like, is that something that you think would make more sense? Because if the Mets do find themselves again, it's very up in the air what McNeil's future is going to be. I don't see a world where they trade him unless they for certain make sure that they have a replacement. It just feels a little bizarre that they would. But again, there's things that we don't know. We know that his presence that we've seen outside of just being a player, there were frustrations this past year when I've deep dived it with Pat Regazzo initially broke the report. So what's kind of your take on the Oakland A's rotation? Because they're in this huge limbo right now. Like, what are they going to do? Like, if they're going to sell, they might as well sell big because they have all these guys that are arbitration eligible. They're looking for significant paydays. We know the A's are notorious for not wanting to pay it. So if that domino falls and it starts to go into effect, do you think that route might be not just potentially better, but the more realistic? Or do you think that the Mets are still better off staying in the free agency pool of things?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to get Frankie Montas, which would be the guy that I want from Oakland. Sean Manaea,
he's the most expensive.
Yeah, he's sick. He's really good. He's a legitimate ace. Where, Sean Manaea is probably a realistic choice, but do I want Sean Manaea? That I don't really know. I would rather, again, be aggressive on the free agent market and try to find a guy there and not have to give up anybody. Also, Sean Manaea wouldn't cost that much, but he would still probably be someone that we know, that we would have to give up someone we know, which to me, that's a little too much. I don't know. The A's are interesting because, like you said, they could just tear it all down, but there is a world where they just keep exactly how they are and maybe move Manaea at the trade deadline, to which he'll probably be cheap then. Then I'm really interested if he's cheap. But yeah, I don't know. Montas is really the guy that interests me. Everybody else on that pitching side there is just kind of whatever. It would really depend on what we give up. That's what it comes down to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I personally would be in favor of Manaea just because I think price-wise, there is a world where the Mets can get that deal done without having to give up an arm and a leg because he is a rental. Same thing goes with Chris Bassett. I think Manaea, I'm always infatuated with lefties that are actually at least decent. Manaea is someone that I think could come in the middle of the rotation and be just fine. Rodon is definitely that one where if you're talking, high risk, high reward, but again, it's someone that is more realistic than a Kershaw. Yeah, I'm fully on board with Rodon. I'm really, really interested to see what his market's going to look like because the Mets did pursue him to a certain degree pre-lockout. Michael Mayer for Mets reported on it, and we didn't hear much about it. His market just seemed really quiet. I think the Texas Rangers were in on him too. There were a couple teams that were, rumored to be connected to him, but there really wasn't a lot on the Mets front there. So I don't know exactly how much interest they're going to have. I think that free agency, first and foremost, is where the Mets are going to go. And then if say that they strike out on some guys that maybe they're looking for, but not on a long-term deal, that's where the trade market might become more apparent. If they're like, okay, as long as we don't completely give up the farm here, we get something done that makes sense. But in your opinion, especially from what you've seen all throughout the offseason thus far, what do you think is the best? Like, what would you prefer for the Mets to do in a very ideal scenario once lockout lifts? Either doing some trades or doing some free agent signings. Like, be as realistic as you possibly can right now. Like, what do you think is the best route for them?
Yeah, I won't throw out Carlos Correa right now, but yeah, I really do. I'll keep hammering it home. Starting pitching, we have a clear gaping hole there. We have our 1-2, and we have our 4-5 per se in Carrasco and Walker, but everybody else is kind of in flux, like David Peterson, McGill. Lucchese is not going to pitch this year. Yamamoto, I think can technically still pitch. I think I'm forgetting even somebody still. But they're all fringe guys.
McGill?
Yeah, I said McGill.
Okay.
Trevor Williams, I think, is still technically around too.
Yep.
These are all guys that are all fringe. These are all guys that you don't want to be in your rotation. And right now, one of them would fall into there. Like, I like McGill, but if he's coming in as like a guy we're depending for on 150 innings to start the season, I don't feel as strong as if he's in that swing role, which I think would be better suited to start the year. I think we really got to get starting pitching. Carlos Rodon, go after a Kikuchi even to be a number 5. Go after Greinke. I don't know. There's so many guys available that I think can help deepen this rotation. And as we know, 5 is nice, but you really got to have like 8 or 9 pitchers at the end of the day to be successful in baseball. Go get as many pitching arms as you can. I want Rodon badly. If I'm the Mets and the lockout ends tomorrow, the first thing I'm doing is I'm calling Carlos Rodon's agent and I'm saying, come to New York. How do we get this done? We're not letting you leave. You're signing with this team.
And the upside, obviously, is that, of course, he is a Scott Boras client. So that's something that the Mets have known better than, say, recent years. Thank you, Max Scherzer. But no, I agree with you. Pitching is obviously number one priority. And it's crazy because when we look at last offseason, I remember going over last offseason with you, like, or the roundup, the Mets added so much depth and they somehow, some way didn't even have remotely close to enough. It's insane just how many injuries they went through this past year. I like, it honestly feels like a blur. It was really like a joke of what transpired.
I cannot be in a situation again where I'm watching Jared Eichhoff pitch. Can't do it. Won't do it. I'll turn off the game. I refuse to sit and watch that. I mean, we got so bad. We signed Vance Worley last year and he was in the minors. Like, that dude hasn't pitched in like 4 years and he was awful when he last pitched in the majors. So like, just go and get quality arms. There's so many out there. Go ahead and get it. Stock up. Make that AAA team strong. The Mets have had such horrible minor league depth. Go and get guys who, if there is injuries, if there's a catastrophic situation like there was again last year, that we aren't at least going to be screwed, even though we technically play good baseball with our AAA lineup out there. But that was not going to happen again this year. I promise you.
I think there's a difference between good baseball and just somehow winning games.
Yeah.
The Mets were able to do that, which was awfully surprising in itself. But no, I agree with you on the rotation. I really do hope that they build it. I know that they will. It's really just a question as to exactly who it's going to be. And as I said this to you already, the fact that the Mets somehow went from looking at a Steven Matz and automatically pivoted to the level of a Kevin Gausman with Scherzer. It wasn't a scenario where they were looking for either of them. They wanted both of them. And the Mets literally had Gausman in their hands, but he went for a pay cut to Toronto because he just wanted Toronto over Queens. I don't know the reasons why. He has his personal reasons. Again, Blue Jays are a wagon, so I don't blame him. They're an awesome team to watch. They're going to continue to be. But point being is that the Mets prove that they're not just looking to adjust this rotation still. They're going to do it probably big. And if that's a Rodon, sweet. Sign me the hell up. If that is someone via trade, then awesome. Sign me up too. But outside of pitching, do you think position player-wise, this is a team that you're comfortable with a Jeff McNeil at second base, with a Cano off the bench, with Escobar starting third? Because I think the Mets are going to land one more significant bat, regardless on if McNeil stays on the team or not. They had aspirations pre-lockout. They, of course, showed interest in Chris Bryant, because why wouldn't they at this point? So what's your take position player-wise? Do you think that, are you comfortable with where they are right now? Or do you think that they're kind of still one missing piece away from putting you personally in a spot where you're like, okay, I like what I'm seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we can improve at third base still, which I think is probably catcher's a huge hole right now. We just don't really have much there. Hopefully Nito is just able to continue to be a defensive rock, and McCann can maybe bounce back, hit against lefties. That would be nice. But there's nowhere to find a good catcher right now. There's no one available unless you're trying to get Wilson Contreras, which that's not going to happen. So third base would be the one spot where, like you said, Chris Bryant. But even then, I want him. I'll take him. He is better than Eduardo Escobar. I believe that, but I really do think that Escobar is going to be fine. My biggest concern right now is just kind of filling in the rest of those spots in like JD, Dom, Cano. They kind of all do the same thing right now. I know Cano technically plays second base and neither of those guys do, but the idea is that they play one position or DH. And to me, that's so limiting. We love JD. JD can hit. We love Dom. He's got great attitude, but his numbers offensively last year were horrible. And there's no real signs of them turning around anytime soon. It was more scary than optimistic going into this next season with Dom. So you're kind of stuck with three guys that are locked into two positions, one of those being a DH, which is just really not something that you should need to be locked into. I'm interested in trying to get more flexible, get more depth. A guy like Brad Miller, I think, would be a nice dude who can play corner outfield spots, third base, second base, first base. He could play a bunch of different positions.
Dude, I'm pretty sure he hit like 2 bombs against the Mets. Of course, when I was at the game with the 7 line in like July, I was like, "Who? Of course."
He's a really, really good player. Like, I don't want him playing every day, but filling in these roles that Dom or JD would be in, I'm super happy with it. We need to have the flexibility. We need to have the positional, opportunity to put guys in different spots. Dom cannot play the outfield again. If Dom Smith steps in the outfield, I'm going to scream at the TV because he just does not know how to play it. If JD Davis plays the outfield, or if he's playing a significant amount of innings at third base, we're doing something wrong. I'm scared. That's not a good problem to have. We got to figure out what to do, because we can't really have two guys taking up spots to basically be platoon DHs.
No, and that's exactly right. Like, I want the Mets to get a Nelson Cruz or a Kyle Schwarber, but they need to figure out what they're doing with this group first. And Cano is just that huge wild card where I don't want him on the team. Obviously, it's not the fact that I don't think that he can't be productive. Maybe he's going to come in and be like the best DH in Mets history, not the fact that this is the first year with the Mets actually really having a DH. But point being is that Cano very well could profile great at DH, but he still doesn't have that versatility like at all. Like, I don't want him in the field personally. I think that he will be a liability, even though that, yes, I know second base isn't to the same extent as short or even third. But JD Davis, huge thing. Like, the guy just doesn't have a glove. I'm like, what are you going to do with him? Yes, big pop in his bat. Maybe he would be awesome at DH, but I want versatility. And Billy Epler has really, vouched for that too. And I'm fully on board. I'd rather have a bunch of guys that are really good, balanced, that are, high on base, or at least pretty solid on base, but you can just throw them everywhere. And that's why Jeff McNeil for his entire career has been so appealing. And that's why it's so interesting that we have gone to this point with him, especially. So to kind of round things up here before I just want to take some questions, as long as that's fine with you. What has your kind of initial take been as a whole about Jeff McNeil, to go back to him? Because I know that obviously you have a little bit of a closer relationship with him. But Jeff as a whole, with his struggles this past season, both on the field, in the locker room, and him having a down year, I know he's going to bounce back. And I know that for all the people that say, oh, he's going to be Daniel Murphy 2.0, no shit. I mean, like, of course he's going to dominate. That's not my concern if you part with him. It's just making sure that if you part with him, that's a trade that benefits both sides. So, it's a win-win versus, say, just one team loses and one team wins. So what's your take as a whole with Jeff McNeil and everything that's transpired with him to this point?
Yeah, I hate the idea of trading him. Take away the personal side of it. As a player, we're trading a guy at his lowest value, a dude who came off of like the worst year that we've seen thus far. Granted, you don't want to keep him around if he's going to continue to play that poorly, but he had a variety of different things going on last year. He had the hamstring injury, which that played a huge part into it, especially for a guy who hits the ball on the ground as much as Jeff. Like, you're just not beating out any ground balls when your hamstrings like that. You're not getting those extra base hits. You're not able to push things into a double. You're not able to be as strong with your core, which would lead into the power problems as well. Like, I don't think he's ever going to be that 2019 Jeff where we saw like the 20 plus homers, 340 average. Like, that's insane. That's nuts. You're talking about one of the best hitters in the infield in baseball, but I think he's still going to be able to get back to that 300 level hitter. He still doesn't strike out a lot, even when he did struggle. Still gets on base really well. Like, it just feels like, for all the things that, like you just said, we needed with the Mets, versatility. McNeil was always that guy. Why would we get rid of him when he does address so many issues, so many problems? I would just so rather put a package together of Dom and JD, even if it's to get a reliever back, which I'm sure nobody wants to hear. But trying to move those guys to get better players, let McNeil be kind of that roving dude, is really nice. We have so many holes. He covers a lot of them. And to me, I think it would be extremely foolish to trade him. I would be really upset.
I think I'll be upset too if it happens. And I will say this, however, I'm pretty open-minded with it, in the sense of, it does seem like, yes, of course, if he's parted with, the main factor isn't going to be just, his relationship with Lindor. But point being is that there is still something there, not necessarily just with him, but like with the locker room as a whole. I don't feel like we're nearly having this conversation if McNeil, nothing happened with him this past year, because he does, of course, have these attitude issues that have been negative for himself, because he's so emotional. Every time he pulls it down first, if he's not yelling F-bombs, there's a problem, right? So like, that's his normal, and I get it. But for someone that struggled for the entire year, that's not a good normal to have. Like, he knows he needs to be in better habits, better mentality at times. And, he, of course, can vouch for himself far better than I can from the outside looking in. But the point I'm trying to make is that if the Mets do part with him, I do believe that there's going to be reasons that go beyond just the talent alone. And also, of course, with them trying to address a need. It makes no sense for them to part with him to, one, create a hole at second right away, unless, one, you make sure you replace him somehow in that infield, or two, make sure that you also land maybe a bona fide middle of the rotation starter. Like, if that's what they end up doing, then okay, I might be upset, but I understand it. So I'm not necessarily in favor of parting with him, but if you're going to, just make sure you're doing it for as much justifiable reasons as possible. Us
100%.
Mets fans are going to get over it knowing that it's still something that benefited the team at the end of the day when they're in a win now stage.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it would be really, really beneficial to be able to move him and get something that we need. Like, we have to get substance back. If we trade him for Luis Sessa, I'll scream, just Luis Sessa. I'll lose it. That's not enough for me. And I think that there's a world where teams aren't going to be particularly aggressive going after McNeil, especially when it seems to be an open book that we're trying to trade him. I want him on the Mets. And like, even the idea that Cano would be our lone second baseman, a guy who's coming into his 38, 39-year-old season off of a steroid suspension. He's old. He hasn't put a healthy season together in forever, never as a Met. It makes me super nervous knowing that like our backup plan to him at second base, if he's the only guy, is Luis Guillorme. I love him, but playing 100 games there is scary for me right now.
Yeah, no, the Mets would put themselves just back in the same issues that they've had in years prior. Like they know that they can't bet on uncertainties anymore. They need to bet on certainties. That's the whole point of depth. And Epler preached that so well, because if you looked at the moves that he did during his time as Angels GM, he did a lot of, really, boom or bust moves. And unfortunately, a lot of them were bust, and he learned from them. And you can see that. I don't think the Mets are going to go down that route where they cause such a big hole, like something like that at second base. But we're both in agreement, both on Jeff McNeil. If you're going to part with them, fine. Just make sure that you're doing it for the right price.
Get the right player. Get the right player if you're going to
exactly. But now let's get into some questions. I know, Michael, thank you so much for the $5 donation. Great member of the channel. Says Mets bullpen was ranked 30th this year. I don't think that's true, Michael. I think that you may have some. I think this is some fake news. Again, I'm not saying
true
that.
either.
I'm not saying that you made this up or anything. I just think that wherever you found this from is inaccurate. Mets bullpen was actually pretty solid last year. Down the stretch, I don't know exactly how bad it got because they were just horrible on every front. But I do think that in order to fix the Mets bullpen, they're going to do it through free agency. And there's a lot of guys, and I talked about them in a separate video, so make sure to check it out for Mets bullpen targets. But, of course, guys like Ryan Tepera, Jake Diekman, Andrew Chafin, they really want to go all in, like Kenley Jansen potentially, Joe Kelly. There are a lot of names that make sense for the Mets bullpen-wise. They're definitely going to add, I would say, at least 2. Maybe even 3. I know that they definitely are going to upgrade in the bullpen. But for the next couple minutes, folks, if you guys are in the live stream right now, if you want to ask away any questions, by all means do so. Please make sure, again, if you don't know who GiraffeNeckMarc is, what the hell are you doing? Make sure to check him out. Links in the description, as always, to his channel. He's doing amazing baseball content. And, of course, the Mets'd Up podcast. The podcast doing really well. I know you guys just came out with a new pod, right?
Yeah, just dropped one today, talking with Matt Eddy of Baseball America, executive editor over there. So if you guys are super into prospect stuff, we go really in depth into international prospects as well as just the farm system in general, and just talking about lockout, bench coach, everything that you hear here, just another way to get more Mets info. So appreciate you if you guys give it a listen.
Awesome. Yeah, guys, make sure you do so. Again, links in the description, as always. Help us get to 200 likes for the next short-term goal in the stream and 13K subs. Always appreciate it. Pet Mets with a $10 donation. Thank you so much, Pet Mets. Says, I'm not for adding playoff teams. Go with 2 leagues, no divisions. Top 5 in each league. 4 and 5 are the wild cards. Stop teams with more wins being wild card LA and less wins a bye Atlanta. What's your take on that, Mark?
Yeah, me and James weirdly talked about that in the last episode, because that was something that is being talked about right now in the CBA, is that I think the owners asked for 14, players said we'll do 12. I'm cool with the 12. I like the idea of first and second place in each division going for it. I hate the idea of 2 leagues, no divisions. I think baseball is such a regional sport. You would lose a lot of what makes it so special and what makes a lot of these fans, like, we've all been to a Mets Braves, a Mets Phillies games. It's different atmosphere than going to Mets Pirates, different than going to the Mets Brewers. It's a lot different. So I don't like the idea of getting rid of divisions. I think that's something I really enjoy about baseball. And I think you should be rewarded for winning your division as well, because I think it is so important to just be the best team in kind of your area. But I understand why people are against it. To me, I think the best, expansion of playoffs would be first and second place, each division. And that's how I would roll. Yeah,
no, I agree. Yeah. I still want divisions too. I understand what he's saying here. He's had some really good takes. Like, every single time he donates, he's really sharing some fun insight. And I'm in favor of the 12 teams as well. I don't want to see crazy expanded playoffs. I think that it's almost like an easy cop out for teams as well that maybe aren't going fully all in, but is somehow sneaking into playoffs. I know it's good, of course, for building fan bases that want to see action, especially for teams that aren't necessarily doing well year after year. But point being, if you're going to expand it, just don't go overboard with it. I think 12 is a nice balance. I'm not in favor of, the short one we had, what was it, like 20?
Yeah, that was so much fun during the COVID season. That was a lot of fun because like that weekend where it was just like the 3-game series every single day, that was unmatched. That was like watching March Madness, but for baseball. But it's not really feasible to have a lot of teams that are under 500 making the playoffs. Like I'm not cool with that.
Yeah, I'm not cool with that either. Exactly. And of course, the Mets were one of the few teams not even make playoffs a year. So that's all you need to know.
Salt in the wound.
Yep. Here, Unhinged Yank, shout out my boy Pat, who has a great Yankees channel. Yes, I know it's Yankees, but trust me, Pat's a G. I'm trying to pop a bottle of Marc when the Yankees win it all in 2022. So there you go. See, Pat has his priorities straight.
That is an OG reference right there. I haven't popped a bottle in a while for the Yankees loss. I didn't do one last year. You want to know why? We're focused on the Mets now. We got money. The Yankees are the poors in New York. So we don't punch down around here. We only punch up. There's no one to punch up. We're at the top now.
And Pat knows that. I know he's been weeping. He's like, why are the Mets doing all the moves the Yankees are supposed to be doing? Again, get used to it. That's all I can really say on that front. We got 2 big dogs in the market now. Crazy. It's actually crazy when you think about it a little bit. Let's see. Okay, this is a good question because I don't know exactly what your in-depth thoughts are on Michael Conforto. I mean, I think everyone knows mine by now, but in a nutshell, I would love it if the Mets could bring him back. It's not happening. I think that ship has sailed now. With the moves that they've done this offseason, I think Conforto is 100% going to bounce back, and I think that he's going to thrive wherever he lands. Michael Conforto is my favorite player on the Mets, so I'm not going to speak too negative about him. But what's your take on him, Marc?
Yeah, I've had such ebbs and flows with Conforto as a fan. Like I loved it when he came up, and then when he started to stink, like had that like little rough patch, I was like, oh man, maybe he just isn't that good. And then he came back, and then he was really good, and then he got hurt, and then I was like, oh, he's struggling again. Maybe he just like isn't as good as we once thought. Maybe he's not this 300 hitter with 30 home runs a year. Like, I don't know. But then he finished the season strong, and you're like, oh my God, this dude, like even in a bad year, was still an above league average offensive player. The right price, I'm always interested in him. I wish him the best. He's not going to be back with the Mets. I would be more shocked with him being back with the Mets than Kershaw, honestly. Like talking to, people everywhere, it just seems like the ship has sailed. He's not going to be a Met, which is sad because I really wanted to see him be one of those great Mets. We'll remember the guy. I'll always have a fond memory of him, but I think the Mets' time is at least over for now. Not that he couldn't come back. He's not going to sign a long-term contract this offseason. There's no way.
Please, for the love of God, don't go to Philly. Don't
please,
no. Please.
Don't go to Philly. Don't go to Washington. Go to Seattle. Go to Oakland. Go far, far away so I can root for you to do well.
I would be all on board with him in Seattle. It would be the outfield that us Mets fans thought we would have, for the most part, Kelenic and Conforto. I'm perfectly down with that. So yeah, if he's going to go anywhere, I would want him to go to the Mariners. White Sox are my AL team, and I think the White Sox make a lot of sense for him. So yeah, him over there, I'm all for it. Okay, here's a good question from Michael. What are some free agent bench options? So my guy that you'll see me talk about again soon, Tommy Pham. I actually think he makes a lot of sense for the Mets off the bench. High on base guy. And I think Wayne Kirby can actually have a say. Heavily advocating for Wayne Kirby. Mets first base coach, was previously with the Padres. I see him speak glowingly of Pham and just his work ethic. I think that's exactly the type of player that Buck would like on this team too. As a fourth outfielder, splitting time with Mark Canha, those types. So he's definitely a guy that stands out to me. There's some others. I know that people want Eddie Rosario. I think Rosario, of course, he was amazing in playoffs. I love playoff performance. He's not a big on-base guy, though, and I do think that he's going to get a little bit bigger of a payday than you would think just based on his playoff performance alone. And I don't think the Mets are going to be that team. Same thing with a guy like Jorge Soler. Doesn't have that defensive versatility. Again, I know wishful thinking because they were so well in playoffs, but I think a guy like Tommy Pham really stands out. He's just one of a couple that I'm going to be deep diving more soon. But what's some under the radar type free agent options you think for the Mets?
Yeah, I mentioned Brad Miller. I'd bring back Jonathan VR too. VR did a great job for us last year. I can't imagine it's going to be too expensive, especially now post lockout whenever it does end. Plays all 3 infield positions, second, short, third. If you want to, you could throw him out in the outfield in an absolute emergency. Switch hitter, good player, gives us something a little bit different, which is a little bit of speed as well. He's crazy. He's nuts. I'd take him back for sure. I really want to find a backup shortstop. We don't really have one. There's also not a whole lot available. Like Freddie Galvis was probably the best guy, and he went to Korea or Japan. I don't remember which league, but we need a backup shortstop right now if we're talking about bench options. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of great ones right now.
I feel like VR is probably towards the top of that list, honestly.
Yeah, I think he would be. And that's fine because, again, he's not going to be playing shortstop very often, we hope. If he plays there 30, 40 games during the season, even just to give Lindor a couple days off, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think that, of course, shortstop will be something that they prioritize because they want Lindor in there a lot. But
yeah,
obviously, unfortunately, naturally, injuries happen, things like that. God forbid. You want to make sure that you have a proper replacement for anyone, basically. And shortstop is a role that the Mets need to make sure that they have at least a certain level of depth with. But a couple more questions before we wrap things up, folks. Another Matthew. Let's see. Should the Mets just go and try to pick up Seiya Suzuki, even though they already have Nimmo and Canha for the corners? Should they? Yes. Will they? No.
Yeah, no. He's going to the Red Sox. I mean, he's going to the Red Sox or the Mariners, I think. So, like, that ship sailed. But I would love him. He would be great. He's a sick player. We also have the looming impending doom of Nimmo not re-signing at the end of this year because he's a Boris agent. So I mean, our Boris client.
Sign him, but he's going to get a payday.
The only thing that scares me about Nimmo is that he's offensively, we know the value he has. He played really well in center field last year. There is just going to be a team that's going to pay him to be one of the elite center fielders in baseball, and the Mets are just not really probably going to do that because of Starling Marte. Someone's, I think, just going to be able to, it's a weird comment to say, outbid the Mets just because the Mets are going to be able to spend money elsewhere as opposed to that Nimmo one. It's super complicated. I hope it doesn't come to this, but I'm super nervous that Nimmo is going to get a massive, massive contract, and the Mets, not that they won't be able to do it, but are just going to value him a little bit less than what he's going for.
This is going to be like a Conforto 2.0, and I really don't want to be.
I think it's even scarier because, like, for Conforto, it's kind of us choosing not to have him, where Nimmo is going to be, everybody's going to want him. He's going to be one of the hot guys next year, without a doubt, and he's going to get a lot of money. He can play center field, which you look at the top center fielders in baseball right now, there's not a lot. There's not a lot of great center fielders. You kind of have, like, the top, the elite, and then it's everybody else, and he falls right into kind of that top category. It's going to be tough to retain him, so I like Seiya Suzuki. I'd love to bring him in, and he could platoon with Canha in his first year. That would be sick.
I think that'd be sick. I think that makes so much sense too. If say you want to bring in Suzuki, but you of course have your uncertainties with how is he going to adjust to the MLB level. Like that's a perfect way to do it. But yeah, I do think he's going to Boston. There's been all these leaks now between him following them in on Instagram and all these different things. So I don't think he's happening. I unfortunately, I'd be lying if I said I don't have a stream preset of the Mets signing him with a perfect Photoshop of him since like November. But I can't use all of them, unfortunately. But yeah, Nimmo, though, great point. I think what's going to be very interesting for him this year, not just being a Scott Boras, client now, but also he should be starting the season in left field. And it's going to be curious to see how that impacts his market, if at all, if he does play the majority of the season in the corner, which is why I think he should. He profiles better as a corner outfielder than a center, mainly because not necessarily the defense that was bad last year, but you're eliminating the injury risk, and he gets injuries every year. We know this, especially with the stuff that he's had with his neck before. And two, he doesn't have the arm like a Starling at center. So like those are just obvious reasons why he makes perfect sense in left field. And I hope that maybe that could benefit the Mets a little bit come, the end of the season. Hopefully he plays a full season, but knowing that, he probably makes more sense as a corner outfielder. So I know that team will be chomping at the bit to get him, but I really, really hope that the Mets prioritize him as long as Nimmo continues to project the way he is. He's such a unique player. There's no one in the league like him to the same degree. He's just, as long as he's actually in this offense, you have a place setter at the top of the lineup every single game.
Yep. Elite at the top of the order.
Yep. All right, let's see. We got one or two more comments, and we're going to wrap things up here. Mets Nation, thank you so much, Ellie, for the dono. Mark, I see all your content. What are the odds to win the World Series is what I'm assuming he says here.
Yeah. For the Mets, I think right now in the National League, they're probably still like the fourth-ish best team. I still firmly believe we got to beat the Braves before I can say they're better.
Yes.
Like that's something I held all last year as well, was that we have to beat the Braves to prove that we're better. Still got the Dodgers, still got the Giants, still got the Brewers, and the Padres are kind of in that same realm as us right now. But I think we have a decent shot. way better shot than we did last year. I feel 100% confident saying that
and we say this every season.
Yes, has a way better chance than last year. Just DeGrom and Scherzer alone gives us a really big advantage. Just gotta stay healthy. It's a lot of things still have to go right for any team to win the World Series, Mets included.
Yeah, no, you're right. And again, great donation there from LA. Thank you so much, but I appreciate that. Yeah, it's way too early for me to predict. I'm not going to be predicting anything. I'm going to try to, hold off as long as I can. The jinxes are inevitable.
There's a reason that video of mine comes out like March 20th. I'm like, I don't want to make any prediction before all the moves have been made because, I know I pick the Mets like every year, but
it's funny. You took the safe pick when the winner, of course, was the more outrageous pick. So, you wouldn't have been that terribly far off to say Mets up until, the last month and a half of the season. The Braves of all teams, out of not even being in a playoff spot for the majority of the season, that's baseball. Things happen.
Baseball. Yeah, National League East has been so funky. We had the Nationals, who were the worst team in baseball in May, and then they won the World Series in 19. So, anything could happen.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, Pet Mets, thank you so much for the donation. Appreciate that. Again, please tell me Mark is not wearing the Mets script with the tail under it. I think Steve Cohen wants to give Citi Field that Shea feel. So electric when full. Hard to explain, but special. No, you're exactly right. And talk about Steve Cohen for a minute. Mark, what has your take been on what they're going to be doing in the stadium? Getting those, the massive, looking like the jumbo upon jumbo screen that they're going to have there in the outfield, which I think is sick. As someone who goes to every movie in Dolby and IMAX, I love all that advanced stuff. I think they're also going to be doing a bunch of the hundreds of TVs. It's going to go directly in line with sports betting being legal in NY. That's what I think personally. But what's your take on what that coming and really just trying to make the atmosphere for Citi Field, kind of unprecedented and just packed every single game, trying to make it more of a normality?
Yeah, no, I love it. Steve Cohen's no dummy. He knows that more butts in the seats means more money in concessions and more money on merchandise and more money on everything. He makes more money by getting more people there, whatever way it is. I love the idea of getting more boards. I love the idea of getting more, updated things, being able to watch the games. I love what you brought about the sports betting too, because I think that this is something that can be so huge, not just for the Mets, but baseball in general it's a hard sport to gamble, 100%. It's probably one of the hardest to figure out how to be good at it, but it might be the easiest sport entry-wise to gambling in that in reality, you could gamble every single at bat. You could bet every single pitch. You could bet ball or strike. There's so much downtime. There's a perfect way to supplement that. It's a little degenerate, but people have done worse. And I think it's going to be a really fun atmosphere at Citi Field. We saw a little bit of it last year during certain games, and it was giving me some goosebumps and some great vibes. I hope we can match that again in 2022.
Yeah, when Citi Field's rocking, you do get the goosebumps. It's like nothing else. And when the Mets, hopefully this season is the beginning of them being a consistent top team, being above 500, making playoffs. As long as the Mets find themselves going down a path, not necessarily to the same degree as the Dodgers or the Yankees, but just being competitive year after year after year. The Mets haven't had that consistency in so long. It's really not easy to build a fan base consistently in the seats when year after year, you don't know what you're getting. So if the Mets can really get a consistency down, the fans are going to constantly come in. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait either. I think it's going to be sick. And again, talking about sports betting, shout out to our sponsor in DraftKings. They're doing a great job over there too. But Gabe, thank you so much for the $5 donation to wrap things up. A non-Mets comment here says, what will the Mariners lineup be? Mark, I'm going to let you run with that because you probably have a better idea than I do.
Yeah, sure. Outfield. I'm not going to give you 1 through 9, but I'll give you positions. Outfield, you got Mitch Haniger, you got Jared Kelenic, you got Kyle Lewis, Taylor Trammell. All those guys can kind of float around. Jake Fraley, too. Those will be kind of all their outfield guys, and eventually J-Rod will get up there. Infield, third base, Chris Bryant, maybe. Trevor Story, maybe. Shortstop, J.P. Crawford. Second base, Adam Frazier. Gross. First base is... Who's their first baseman? Why am I blanking on who their first baseman is? I know it's not Evan White. They have someone better. I can't think of who it is.
I was thinking Evan
White. Oh,
Ty
France. Yeah, Ty France.
Yep, you're right.
Can't forget the king, Ty France. Catcher, I think, is technically Luis Torrens, which, whatever. The Mariners are sneaky good. The Mariners are building a dynasty over there.
They're going to be a team, apparently.
They are America's team. They're going to be building a dynasty for the next 4, 5, 6 years. That is going to be. Saw a little glimpse of it last year. They're going to be really, really good for the foreseeable future.
And they're just an easy team to root for. Given their not just their playoff drought, but they just have a lot of fun personality. Like JP Crawford, I'm a big fan. I've seen him thrive outside of the Phillies organization. I'm all for it. So like
they're
stuff
Mets
like
West. They're Mets West.
They are Mets West. Yeah, that's a great point. I love that. But with that being said, folks, that's going to wrap things up. So I thank you all so much that chimed in the live stream, whether you watched live or on replay. Make sure to smash that like and subscribe on as always. And please make sure to give a huge thank you again to Mark if you're in the live stream. Everyone say thanks for him coming in. Guys, please make sure to check out GiraffeNeckMarc. Links in the description as always to not just his normal YouTube channel, but the Mets'd Up podcast. You will be seeing him back on the channel again very soon. And Mark, any final words before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a baseball fan, stay patient. It's going to come soon, hopefully sooner than later. And once it does, it's Mets season. Let's get going.
Absolutely. All right. Appreciate you, Mark. Appreciate everyone watching. Thank you guys so much. More great content here coming on the channel very soon. And let's go Mets, baby.
Let's go Mets.